Prince Harry reportedly told his father, King Charles III, a man currently managing a cancer diagnosis that is not in remission, that without taxpayer-funded armed security, he would not bring Archie and Lilibet to the United Kingdom to see him. And the king's response was nothing. Not an argument, not a counteroffer, not a briefing to a sympathetic journalist, not a signal through an intermediary that the conversation was welcome, not even a carefully worded statement from Buckingham Palace expressing hope for a resolution. Silence. Complete, sustained, deliberate silence. And I need you to understand something before we go any further. In the world of royal communication, where every word is weighed, every gesture is calibrated, and even a facial expression at a state funeral gets decoded by 50 correspondents within the hour, silence is never an accident. Silence is always a choice. And in this specific context, at this specific moment, with this specific set of pressures bearing down on a 76-year-old man fighting cancer, silence is not just a choice. It is the most strategically significant and personally revealing response King Charles could have given. And tonight, I am going to show you exactly why. There's a principle in negotiation theory that applies here with uncomfortable precision. In any exchange where one party has made a demand and is waiting for a response, the person who speaks next loses positional ground. Every negotiator, every hostage specialist, every labor mediator knows this instinctively. The silence after a demand is not empty space. It is a countermove. It forces the person who made the demand to sit with the sound of their own position and to begin wondering whether they overplayed their hand. In professional negotiations, the person who breaks first usually concedes first. And Charles, whatever else he is, spent decades watching the most sophisticated diplomatic apparatus on earth operate from inside his own family's institutions. He understands the weight of not responding. He may not frame it in negotiation terminology, but the discipline required to absorb a public statement about your own grandchildren being withheld and respond with nothing, that is not passivity. That is a decision made with the full understanding of what engagement would cost. Because here is what nobody is mapping for you. There are two completely different ways to read this story, and the one you choose determines whether Prince Harry looks like a concerned father protecting his children or something considerably less sympathetic. And which reading is correct depends entirely on a single question. A question about a Scottish estate, a permanent security infrastructure that already exists there, and a summer visit that could have happened last year and the year before that, and did not. By the time we reach that question, you will understand why King Charles chose silence, why Prince William would have demanded it, and why the clock that is actually running underneath this entire dispute is the one variable that nobody in this family gets to control. But first, let me lay out exactly what was reportedly said, because how this communication was framed is precisely what caused the reaction it caused. And the reaction tells you how the statement landed inside the palace walls. According to reporting that attracted significant attention across multiple outlets, Harry communicated to his father that without appropriate security arrangements being confirmed in advance, he would travel to the United Kingdom alone rather than bringing his children. The framing was practical. Without the security confirmed, the children cannot safely make the journey. Harry would not expose Archie and Lilibet to what he characterizes as an unacceptable level of risk by bringing them into a country where he does not have the protection he believes they require. Taken in complete isolation, stripped of every piece of context, that position is defensible. A parent making safety-based decisions about where their children travel is ordinary. It is expected. Nobody would fault a father for saying, "My children are not going somewhere I consider unsafe." If this were genuinely a neutral logistical disagreement between two parties negotiating in good faith about the appropriate level of protection for a specific trip, the statement would register as nothing more than a straightforward update on where discussions stood. What moved it out of that category, what transformed it from a logistics update into something that detonated inside the palace, is the years of context wrapped around it. Harry's dispute with the royal household about his security arrangements is not a new disagreement that arose from one planned visit. This is an active, contested, litigated, multi-year legal and political battle that has been fought through court proceedings, through public statements, through sustained media campaigns on both sides. Court cases have been filed, rulings have been issued. The palace's position, maintained consistently from the moment Harry stepped back from royal duties, is that the level of protection provided to him changed when his status changed, and that this is an institutional matter governed by established process, specifically the Executive Committee for the Protection of Royalty and Public Figures, not by personal preference or family negotiation. That position has not shifted, not once, not under any of the pressure applied to it. In that context, a statement linking the children's presence in the king's life to the resolution of the security dispute does something very specific. It places two categories of issue alongside each other that the palace has spent years arguing must remain separated: family relationships on one side, institutional security policy on the other. And by making one contingent on the other, by saying the children come when the security is resolved, the statement creates a form of pressure that the institution cannot respond to without either capitulating or being seen as choosing policy over grandchildren. And that, in my analysis, is the real architecture of what happened. Because once you understand that framing, you understand why silence was the only move Charles had left. Let me show you why. Imagine you are King Charles. You are 76 years old. You received a cancer diagnosis during the first year of your reign. You are managing a treatment schedule while simultaneously performing the duties of head of state for a country and a commonwealth of nations. You buried your mother after her 70-year reign, managed the most significant institutional transition the British monarchy has seen since the abdication crisis, absorbed the Oprah Winfrey interview, the Netflix documentary series, the memoir titled Spare, all without publicly responding in kind. You did not brief against your son. You did not authorize retaliation through sympathetic journalists. You did not issue a point-by-point rebuttal. You absorbed it, all of it. And now your son has reportedly communicated through whatever channel that access to your grandchildren is conditional on a security concession that your own institutional advisors, your heir Prince William, and the established governmental process all tell you must not be granted under pressure. You have exactly 3 options. Option 1, capitulate. Grant the security arrangement. Get the grandchildren to Balmoral or Windsor or wherever the visit would happen. The immediate emotional reward is obvious. You see Archie, you see Lilibet. You hold them. You sit with them in a garden and have the kind of afternoon that grandparents live for, the kind that becomes the memory the children carry after you are gone. But the institutional cost is catastrophic. You have just established on the record that security decisions made by the executive committee can be overridden by family pressure applied through the press. Every future negotiation with Harry proceeds from that precedent. And more importantly, Prince William, your heir, inherits a situation where a security arrangement was granted not through process, but through applied pressure. William, by every available piece of reporting, would view that as an unacceptable breach. The relationship between the institution and the individual would be permanently altered in ways that extend well beyond this specific dispute. Option 2, publicly refuse. Issue a statement through whatever mechanism, making clear that the security question is an institutional matter and that family access is not and will not be used as a mechanism to influence it. The institutional credibility is preserved. The process remains intact. William is satisfied. And the coverage for the next 72 hours is about a grandfather with cancer who chose institutional process over seeing his grandchildren. Every headline writes itself. Every commentator finds the emotional angle. And the story becomes Charles chose the rules over the kids. That framing, once it enters public consciousness, does not come out. It becomes the permanent characterization. It follows him through whatever time he has left. Option 3, silence. Say nothing, authorize nothing, signal nothing. Let the story exist in the public space without confirming it, without denying it, without engaging with its framing. Accept that the narrative will be shaped by others. Accept that commentators will fill the vacuum with their own interpretations. Accept the cost of being seen as passive or unresponsive. But avoid choosing between the two options that both lead somewhere damaging. Charles chose the third option, and I think when you see it from his position with those specific constraints, it is the only option that does not close a door permanently. Silence keeps the situation unresolved. Unresolved is painful. Unresolved is not permanent. The other two options are permanent. But here is where the story shifts, because there is a specific scenario that keeps surfacing in the analysis from royal correspondents who know the operational realities of the monarchy. And once you hear it, the security argument starts to look fundamentally different. Balmoral, the king's private estate in Scotland, 50,000 acres of royal property in the Scottish Highlands, one of the most extensively secured private residences in the world. The security infrastructure there is permanent, professional, staffed year-round, and it exists regardless of which guests are present or what their individual protection status might be. The travel route from a private airfield to the estate involves primarily royal land and controlled terrain rather than public commercial spaces. The estate is large enough, and I mean genuinely vast, that a family visit could occur entirely within its boundaries without any movement into environments where Harry's individual security arrangements would become relevant. Think about what that means practically. A private flight from the United States, landing at an airfield with pre-arranged access, transfer by secure vehicle on controlled roads to the estate. Days spent entirely within the grounds, children playing on the same lawns where their father played as a boy, where Princess Diana brought Harry and William for summers, where the royal family gathers every August. The castle where Queen Elizabeth spent her final days. The grounds where Harry learned to fish and ride and where some of his happiest childhood memories were formed, memories he himself has described publicly in interviews and in Spare. No public appearances, no press conferences, no walkabouts in Edinburgh or London where an uncontrolled crowd could present the kind of security scenario Harry's legal team has described in court filings. Just Balmoral, just the estate. Just a grandfather and two small children, and the kind of ordinary, protected private time that the security of that property has always made possible for every member of this family. The Queen hosted prime ministers there. World leaders have walked those grounds under the same security umbrella. Foreign heads of state with genuine, documented security threats against them have stayed at Balmoral without incident. The idea that two children aged 7 and 5 cannot safely visit the same estate because their father's individual protection status is being contested in a separate legal proceeding is an argument that, once you examine the practical reality of what Balmoral actually is, begins to look less like a security concern and more like a negotiating position wearing safety clothing. Every royal commentator who has raised this scenario makes the same specific point. This visit is logistically achievable right now, regardless of where the formal security dispute stands. The infrastructure exists, the property exists, the security exists, the invitation, by all available reporting, exists. Charles has never closed the door. Charles has never said they are not welcome. So if the Balmoral scenario is achievable and the people who understand the operational realities of royal security argue specifically that it is, then the question becomes a different question entirely. It is no longer about whether the children can safely visit the United Kingdom. It is about why they have not. And that question does not have a publicly available answer from either side. What it implies, and I am going to say this as carefully and as plainly as I can, is that the obstacle is not primarily about the mechanics of getting two children safely from Montecito, California, to a secured Scottish estate. Logistics of that kind get resolved in days when both parties genuinely want them resolved and are willing to make the practical compromises that resolution requires. They tend to remain unresolved when one or both parties has a reason, strategic, legal, or emotional, for keeping the broader question unsettled. And this is where I think the actual center of the dispute reveals itself, because what several observers argue is really being negotiated here is not a summer trip. It is a precedent. The reported position, as these observers read it, is not really about arranging for Archie and Lilibet to visit Balmoral in a particular August. It is about establishing a durable, permanent, taxpayer-funded security arrangement that would follow Prince Harry wherever he travels, for as long as he and his family need it. Applicable regardless of which monarch sits on the throne when the arrangement is in place. An arrangement of that kind would not expire with Charles's reign. It would become embedded in the institutional security apparatus that Prince William inherits when he eventually becomes king. And once established, it would be significantly harder to revoke than it would be to decline before it was ever granted. Think about that from William's perspective for a moment. Everything we know about William's approach to the Sussex situation suggests a man who draws clear lines and does not redraw them. William has made his assessment. His position, by every credible piece of reporting, is that Harry chose to leave royal life, that the consequences of that choice include changes to his security status, and that institutional decisions should not be reversed because a family member applies emotional pressure through the media. If Charles grants the security arrangement under these circumstances, William inherits a binding precedent he fundamentally opposes. And William is the future of the institution. Charles knows that. Charles has always known that. And whatever private pain Charles carries about the distance from his grandchildren, he also carries the responsibility of not handing his heir a structural problem created by capitulating to pressure. This dynamic between Charles and William is itself one of the most underexamined dimensions of the story. Charles and William do not approach this the same way. Their methods are different. Their temperaments are different. And their relationship with Harry's departure is different because their positions in the institutional hierarchy give them different responsibilities and different exposure to the consequences of any resolution. William is thinking in decades. He is thinking about what the monarchy looks like when his children are adults, when George is preparing for the responsibilities that William himself now carries. A precedent set now about security arrangements for a departed royal does not expire when the current reign ends. It becomes part of the institutional furniture. It becomes something that future claimants can point to. It becomes the baseline for negotiations that have not yet been imagined with people who have not yet been born. William is not being cold when he holds the line. He is being institutional in the purest sense of the word. He is protecting the structure, not punishing his brother. But the effect for Charles is that one son's institutional judgment constrains his ability to reach the other son's children. And that constraint is one Charles has accepted, repeatedly, by choosing silence over capitulation. Now let me talk about time. Because time is the dimension of this story that cuts through every institutional argument, every legal position, every strategic calculation, and lands somewhere that has nothing to do with policy and everything to do with being human. King Charles's cancer is not in remission. The palace has been careful and precise in its public language about this. He is responding to treatment. His schedule has been reduced in intensity. He is in what they describe as a precautionary phase. But the cancer itself is not resolved. It is being managed. And managed is not the same as cured. He is 76. He received this diagnosis while navigating the most demanding transition any British monarch has faced in nearly a century, and he has carried it with visible determination, continuing to work, continuing to perform the functions of head of state, continuing to show up at engagements when many people in his position would have retreated entirely from public life. He is also a grandfather whose relationship with two grandchildren who live approximately 8,000 miles away is, by all available reporting, extremely limited. Archie is 7, Lilibet is 5. I want you to sit with those numbers because they are the most important facts in this entire story. 7 and 5. Those are the specific ages where a grandparent's consistent physical presence shapes memory, where the ordinary, unremarkable experience of being in the same room together, playing on a lawn, hearing stories, sitting at a table, eating together, creates the foundation of how a child understands their place in a family. That foundation does not get built through video calls and care packages. It does not get built through scheduled appearances or negotiated visits that never materialize. It gets built through presence, through repetition, through the accumulation of small, unscripted, unfilmed moments that a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old will carry with them for the rest of their lives. And if That foundation does not get built during these specific years. Its absence leaves a different kind of foundation. One made of distance and unfamiliarity and the quiet awareness that a grandparent existed somewhere far away but was never really part of the texture of their childhood. That kind of absence has its own weight. And it is not the kind of thing that a reconciliation at age 12 or 15 can undo. The window is specific, it is narrow, and it is closing at a rate that nobody in this family fully controls. I want to put this in terms that cut through the royal framing and land somewhere universal, because this is not actually a royal story. This is a family story. Think about your own grandparents. If you were lucky enough to have grandparents who were present during your childhood, think about what you remember. You probably do not remember specific conversations. You probably do not remember dates or events with any precision. What you remember is presence, the smell of their house, the sound of their voice in a specific room, the feeling of being picked up or the weight of a hand on your shoulder, the knowledge, absorbed rather than taught, that you belong to something larger than your immediate family, that there were people in the world whose connection to you went back further than your own memory, and whose love for you was a different texture than your parents' love. That foundation, that specific emotional architecture, is what is at stake for Archie and Lilibet right now. And it is being built or not built in real time, during these specific years, at these specific ages. While adults on both sides of the Atlantic argue about security protocols and legal precedents and institutional processes, the children do not care about any of that. The children just know whether their grandfather is there or not there, and right now he is not there, and the summers keep passing. Several biographers and senior royal correspondents who have covered Charles for decades have noted something specific about how he carries this particular dimension of the estrangement. The sourcing consistently describes a man who is not hardened the way William has hardened. Charles leaves doors open. He reaches out through intermediaries. He absorbs significant public criticism and sustained private hurt without closing the relationship off in response. He does not draw the lines that William draws. His instinct, his disposition, his fundamental nature is to keep returning to the possibility of repair. And that quality, that persistent willingness to extend grace even when grace has not been reciprocated, becomes more urgent and more poignant against the backdrop of a serious illness. Because the person most naturally inclined to extend an invitation is also the person whose timeline for doing so is genuinely uncertain. The person who keeps the door open is also the person whose ability to stand at that door is not guaranteed. And this is where I need to address the parallel that keeps surfacing in every serious analysis of this story, because it complicates the narrative in ways that nobody involved would find comfortable. Meghan Markle's father, Thomas Markle, has been publicly and completely estranged from his daughter for years. He has had no relationship with Archie and Lilibet. None. No visits. No confirmed contact. Complete severance. Now, the circumstances of that estrangement are different from the circumstances of the Charles situation. Thomas Markle's conduct before the wedding, the staged tabloid photographs, the cooperation with the press, the sustained public commentary afterward, all of that provides a distinct set of reasons for the breakdown. The argument for treating these as entirely separate cases is that the causes are different, the contexts are different, and theoretically the remedies available are different. But here's the argument for treating them as part of the same pattern, and it is a simpler argument. Two grandfathers, two complete absences from the lives of the same two children. Both situations are the product of choices made entirely by adults. Both persist year after year despite the fact that the children, who had no voice in any of these decisions, are the ones who bear the actual, lived, daily consequence of the estrangement. Two grandfathers on opposite sides of the world, neither one with a meaningful relationship with Archie and Lilibet. The causes may differ, the outcome for the children is identical. And that identical outcome, two complete grandparental absences existing simultaneously, is the kind of pattern that biographers and psychologists will eventually examine with the seriousness it deserves. Because when every grandparental relationship in a family has been severed, at some point the question shifts from why each individual relationship failed to what is the common variable across all of them. That question has not been publicly asked by anyone with the standing to demand an answer. But it sits in the background of every piece of reporting on this subject, and every informed observer can feel its weight even when they choose not to name it directly. And there is a dimension to the Thomas Markle situation that makes the Charles parallel even more uncomfortable to examine. Thomas Markle has publicly begged to see his grandchildren. He has made emotional appeals. He has given interviews expressing his desperation for contact. He has been denied. And the Sussex position on that denial has been that Thomas Markle's conduct, specifically the tabloid cooperation and the public statements, made the relationship untenable. Whatever the merits of that assessment, it established a principle. Conduct has consequences. Behavior that damages trust results in the withdrawal of access. Apply that principle to the Charles situation and ask yourself whether King Charles's conduct toward the Sussexes, absorbing the Oprah interview without public retaliation, absorbing the Netflix series without briefing against them, absorbing the memoir without a legal response, extending invitations through intermediaries, keeping the door open year after year, constitutes the kind of behavior that justifies withholding grandchildren. Apply the Sussexes' own standard, and then tell me whether the situations are parallel. And let me address something that landed in the same news cycle and provides its own kind of context. The FIFA World Cup is being held in the United States this summer. Harry lives in the United States. And David Beckham, whose falling out with Harry traces back to the accusations made against Victoria Beckham that turned out to be completely unfounded, an accusation sourced to a salon receptionist rather than to Victoria herself, is one of the most visible faces of the tournament. Beckham, who publicly says that whenever Prince William asks him to do something, the answer is always yes, is operating at the highest level of international sporting diplomacy. Harry, who lives in the same country where the tournament is taking place, is absent from those arrangements. The sports world, which operates on its own set of judgments about credibility and commercial value, made its assessment, and that assessment lands alongside the security and grandchildren story in a way that widens the frame. Harry has also demonstrated, repeatedly, that international travel to challenging security environments is achievable when it is genuinely prioritized. He visited Ukraine during an active military conflict. The Sussex operation has arranged international trips to multiple locations that would present genuine, measurable security challenges. And those trips were not derailed by the absence of a specific institutional arrangement from the British government. Those trips happened. Security was arranged privately, the logistics were solved, which raises the specific and pointed question that nobody in Harry's camp has publicly answered. Is the United Kingdom, a country with one of the most professional and experienced security services on Earth, uniquely unsolvable as a security environment for a former senior royal traveling with a private protection team? Or is it uniquely contested as a political and legal battleground where the dispute has acquired a momentum that goes well beyond the practical question of getting from Montecito to Scotland with 2 children? If Harry can go to Kyiv during a war but cannot bring his children to Balmoral during peacetime, the security argument stops being about security. And this is the observation that I think cuts deepest, and I am going to make it plainly because it deserves plain language rather than diplomatic softening. Harry has spoken repeatedly, with evident emotion and at considerable length, about the consequences of losing his mother young. Princess Diana's death when Harry was 12 years old shaped everything that followed. He has described the specific wound of a parent being gone before a child is ready, the things that were never said, the questions that can no longer be asked, the conversations that could not happen because the person was no longer there to have them. He has articulated this understanding about grief and time and the permanence of absence with more emotional force than almost any public figure of his generation. He made it the emotional center of Spare. He made it central to how he presents himself, his motivations, his decisions. He made it the foundation of Sentebale, his African charity for children affected by HIV, named after the Sesotho word meaning forget-me-not, a direct tribute to Diana. And here's the parallel that I genuinely struggle with. His father is alive. His father is present. His father is, by every available report, extending grace repeatedly and without public complaint. The door to Balmoral stands open. The security infrastructure at Balmoral exists and has existed for decades. The invitation has not been withdrawn. It has reportedly been renewed multiple times through intermediaries. King Charles, the man Harry described watching, absorbed the news of the Queen's death at Balmoral in September 2022 and thinking about how lonely he looked. That man is asking to see his grandchildren. And the conditions attached to the fulfillment of that request involve a separate institutional dispute that Balmoral's existing security renders practically irrelevant for the specific scenario of a private family visit. Harry lost his mother at 12. He has told us what that did to him. He has described the specific, permanent, irreversible wound of growing up without a parent. He has said that the loss shaped every relationship he formed afterward, every decision he made, every way he understood himself and his place in the world. He has been more publicly vulnerable about parental loss than any member of his family in living memory. And yet his children's grandfather, a man with cancer that is not in remission, is spending his 76th year on this planet without those grandchildren present. And the stated reason is a security arrangement that Balmoral's own permanent infrastructure makes unnecessary for the kind of visit that has been on the table for years. The distance between the Harry who understood his father's loneliness so clearly and described it so movingly, and the Harry who is maintaining conditions that deepen that loneliness while time runs out, is the distance that makes this story impossible to sit with comfortably, because both versions of Harry appear to be genuine. The grief is genuine, the love for his mother is genuine, the understanding of what parental absence does to a child is genuine, and the conditions are also genuine. And those two things existing simultaneously in the same person is the part of this story that no amount of institutional analysis or strategic framing can resolve. So, where does this leave us? Let me pay off everything I opened. The silence. Charles chose silence because it was the only option that did not close a door permanently. Capitulation sets a precedent that damages the institution William inherits. Public refusal turns him into the grandfather who chose rules over children. Silence preserves the possibility of resolution without creating the conditions that make resolution harder. It is not a comfortable choice. It is the least damaging choice available to a man with no good options. The Balmoral question. The estate exists. The security exists. The infrastructure that has hosted heads of state and prime ministers under credible threat conditions exists year-round, regardless of any visitor's individual protection status. A private visit, no press, no public appearances, is logistically achievable by every informed assessment available. The fact that it has not happened, summer after summer, despite the infrastructure and despite the open invitation, tells you that the obstacle is not security. The obstacle is whatever the security dispute has become a proxy for. And what it has become a proxy for, if the observers who read this as a precedent negotiation are correct, is a permanent, taxpayer-funded arrangement that would outlast Charles's reign and bind William's. The children. Archie is 7, Lilibet is 5. They are in Montecito, their grandfather is in London and at Balmoral. Their other grandfather, Thomas Markle, is estranged completely. 2 grandfathers, 2 absences, 2 sets of adult decisions, 1 set of children bearing the consequences of all of it without having been consulted about any of it. The time. Charles's cancer is not in remission. He is 76. He is responding to treatment. He is carrying the weight of the crown, the weight of the diagnosis, and the weight of this estrangement simultaneously. The window for building the kind of relationship that shapes how a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old understand their grandfather is not indefinite. It is narrowing. And it narrows at a pace that no legal filing, no security arrangement, and no palace communication strategy can control. The security dispute is not resolved. No meeting between Harry and King Charles has been publicly confirmed or scheduled. The Home Office has not confirmed taxpayer-funded protection for Harry's next reported visit to the United Kingdom. The children remain in California. The king remains in treatment. The Balmoral estate remains secure, available, and open every summer, and the summers keep passing. Charles chose silence. And I think that silence is the sound of a man who has decided that engaging with this specific framing, responding to a position that ties grandchildren to security concessions, would cost more than it could repair. He cannot capitulate without setting a precedent that damages the institution William will inherit. He cannot publicly refuse without becoming the grandfather who chose rules over grandchildren in every headline for the rest of his life. So he absorbs, he waits, he keeps the door open. He carries whatever he carries privately in the same private way he carried the diagnosis and the documentary and the memoir and everything else this family has produced over the last 6 years. And the question I keep returning to, the one that sits underneath every legal argument and every institutional position and every strategic calculation, is the simplest one and the hardest one. How many more summers? That is not a rhetorical question. It is a mathematical one. And nobody in this story, not Harry, not Charles, not William, not Meghan, gets to determine the answer. The answer is determined by biology and by medicine and by the kind of uncertainty that does not negotiate. And against that kind of uncertainty, every other consideration in this story, the legal disputes, the security arrangements, the institutional precedents, the public narratives, all of it shrinks. Because time does not wait for negotiations to conclude. Time does not wait for positions to soften. Time does not file extensions or request continuances. Time runs. And for a 76-year-old man with cancer that is not in remission, time runs in one direction only. And every summer that passes without Archie and Lilibet on the lawns of Balmoral is a summer that does not come back. That is the part of this story that no amount of strategic silence or legal maneuvering or institutional process can make comfortable. And it is the part that matters most.